Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Needs Some Introduction. In today's episode, we will be breaking down the eighth episode of The Agency. Two more episodes to go, Sona. And this episode is called The Truth Shall Set You Free. Does the truth set people free here? I mean, there is a lot of truth telling, by the way, and some of the most spy-like activities lead to negative consequences, to say the least, for at least one character. What do you think about the title here for this episode?
Well, I didn't think about it while I was watching it, but now that we're discussing it, I'm remembering how when he's in the hospital, they have him hooked up to a polygraph.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess maybe it's a reference to whatever circumstance he's in right now and his true description of all of the events that have led up to his current situation.
Do you have any guess as to who's questioning him right now, by the way?
I don't. Do you?
There was something in the questioning that made me think it was a Chinese agent. And then immediately after that, we see part of her head for the first time. And she has straight dark hair, which is kind of a stereotype, obviously, but it did reinforce what I was already suspecting. I don't know if there was something in the question that made me think immediately of a Chinese agent, or the fact that the question she asks about, him being really good at getting the correct response on his polygraph. It just basically made it seem like this is not CIA or any friendly agency that, even if they are questioning him for nefarious reasons, it doesn't seem like they are, on his side or even familiar with him. And it didn't seem like it's a Russian agent. So I'm trying to place who it could possibly be. So anyway, that's my guess. And of course, he has overtly exposed himself to these Chinese, what is, speaking of the truth setting you free, what was pretty much covert up until now is no longer covert almost across the board.
Yes.
Before we get into this all, how are you doing with your cold? How are you recovering?
Well, up until yesterday, I sounded like a pack a day smoker. I think now I sound maybe like a quarter pack a day smoker. But the thing that has really shaken me is that for the first time in my life that I know of at this advanced age, I have an ear infection.
Oh boy, I hate those.
And it's really interesting. The only reason I even thought of it is because I finally returned to the office this week after being away what feels like forever. And I was talking with somebody who works there, and she was telling me how she had a double ear infection.
Oof.
And I thought, like, oh, so typical of me to hear this story, right? And then I'm like a hypochondriac. I must have an ear infection too, because she had an ear infection. This feeling started on Wednesday. And by Friday, I was like, no, I really do think I feel some strange pressure in my ear. And it is kind of hurting. I do have time to go to urgent care, so let me go. So I went yesterday. The doctor looked in one ear and she said, okay. And then she looked in the other ear and went, oh. Yes, this is infected. I got my antibiotics and hopefully I am on the road to recovery.
Oh, I hope so. It's funny. Knock wood, I rarely get any throat or ear infections anymore, but I used to get them so much when I was younger and it was so painful. And miraculously, now that I'm older, I have not had one in quite some time.
I definitely think of an ear infection as a little kid
Right.
illness. So, it hadn't even occurred to me that it could possibly be an issue. I think about it for my kid. He's gotten ear infections
Right.
before. But yeah, so it's all very disconcerting for me. It's an interesting kickoff to 2025.
Hopefully it'll be the rarity that gives you some kind of insurance policy for the future, but we'll see.
Yes, now I've had it. And
right.
Yes,
like getting COVID for the first time. Another thing to mention here, of course, is we actually have a pretty large listenership out in California and concentrated in Los Angeles. It's our most populous center of listenership in the US. And of course, our hearts go out to the people who are losing their homes out there.
So
and
awful.
Hopefully this thing will be
tragic.
under control soon. I mean, now that the planes can get up in the air and it looks like they're starting to contain it, but the fire is so large now that it's going to probably take at least another week. And of course, there's going to be a lot more damage along the way for them to be able to put that out. So
really horrifying.
Maybe they'll get some more rain and that might help them soon. And I have a couple of animation recommendations for you, Sona, that you might want to watch with, and this is for the audience in general, two films that I saw just this week that people might want to watch. One is available very easily on Netflix. This is certainly going to get an Academy Award nomination for Best Animated Film. This is, if you're familiar with this brand, it's from Aardman. It is the claymation Wallace and Gromit films and short films. And I've been watching these films since the 80s when the first one was nominated for an Academy Award. Just 5 minutes, someone making a claymation movie with these two characters in it in his basement, and ended up getting an Academy Award nomination. And of course, the brand has grown since then. And now they're on Netflix. They do the Shaun the Sheep movies, which are also very entertaining. My daughter's grown up watching all this content since it was familiar to me when I was younger. They just made a Chicken Run sequel, which was just okay. I was a little disappointed with that one, to be honest. And now, of course, the most recent Wallace and Gromit movie, which is very entertaining. It's very sweet. The actor who played the owner of the dog, the Wallace character, just passed away this year, so we won't be seeing more of this, unfortunately. And they've announced that they will not make them without him. But it is a beautiful send-off. And for people who are not familiar with this is very family-friendly. The dog is a mute character. The buffoonish inventor owner of the dog is, very funny, clueless, and smart at the same time. It's a very entertaining dynamic between these two characters. And there's a bunch of short films you can watch. I think all the short films are available on Amazon Prime. And now there's 2 feature-length films, by the way. One of them is called Curse of the Were-Rabbit, which is a Halloween watch for me and my daughter every year. And so this is a very entertaining series of films, very family-friendly. And yet, if you are a film fan, there are scenes that are copied from like erotic thrillers, from Hitchcock movies, from film noirs. There's also like action sequences that are from the Terminator movies. And so if you are a film fan, there are all these Easter eggs that you're like, oh, I know what they're doing there, but completely family friendly and really fun to watch with the kids. And another film that just won the Golden Globe for Best Animated Film, which is available to rent this week, is a film called Flow. And speaking of making a film in your living room, this is I forget, he's from one of the former Soviet nations, is someone who animates movies in his own living room using just off-the-shelf animation software. And this is an incredibly beautiful film, also completely wordless, by the way. It's called Flow, and it is about a cat who is basically just roaming this countryside, and there is some kind of flood happening. And the whole story and the discovery of what is actually happening in this story is completely told from the POV of the cat, and you see just other animals he runs into as the flooding gets worse and worse, and how they have to like solve problems together. And it is absolutely beautiful. It makes it sound like it is just this tiny story. It actually becomes an epic story by the end of it. It's truly remarkable, and just visually, just absolutely one of the most stunning works of animation you're going to see in the next few years. And just the thought that someone just did this, and with very few resources. The music also absolutely beautiful. At the Golden Globe, his friend who did the music also went up on stage with him, that broadcast last week. And it's a really beautiful film. And I would not be surprised at all to see this thing win Best Animated Film this year at the Oscars. And it will definitely be nominated. So do check that out. It's called Flow. And once again, you can watch it with your kids. And at the same time, it is very rich and full of really interesting symbolism and complex storytelling through this prism of just following these animals roaming the countryside. It's a truly beautiful film. So do check that out as well. And of course, just some show notes for the near future. Sona, we have Severance 2 coming. It's coming. It's so close. I just published an episode this week where I had all my theories on my rewatch of Severance. And as I was recording it, by the way, I came up with even other possible theories and things like that. So I know you haven't done that kind of deep analysis, and you probably don't want to. I know the kind of
want to, but you are very good at figuring things out in advance. So
I did what I started doing back 3 years ago when I was analyzing the characters' names, and I found some really interesting discoveries just in doing that for the rest of the characters as well. Anyway, that episode's in the feed, so check it out if you're curious. Sona, are you ready? Have you rewatched any of season 1?
I'm not ready whatsoever, but I'll get ready.
Oh, and of course, the one thing maybe I'll put this right at the top of the episode. I have a public service announcement for anybody who is listening to this and is thinking, I'd love to watch Severance, but I don't have Apple TV Plus. 2 things. First of all, Roku. For those who aren't familiar, Roku, of course, used to be a DVR, a device you would buy for the house. But It's also just an app. You can just go to Roku.com and they stream content there, even original content. Well, by chance, they are currently streaming the whole first season of Severance for free on Roku. So check that out. That's the first thing. Second of all, if you did buy a Roku device, maybe for Christmas, you get Apple TV Plus free for 3 months. Third of all, if you have any new Apple devices, you automatically get Apple TV Plus for free for 3 months. And maybe along those lines, by the way, the most recent time I got Apple for free was because I didn't even think about this. I had bought a new flat screen TV. I installed the Apple TV Plus app on the smart TV, just installed it. And as soon as I installed it, it says, hey, you got 3 months free of Apple TV Plus because they counted the new device I bought, not an Apple device, by the way, it was an LG, but they counted it as a new device. So I'm like, awesome, 3 months for free. But Sona, I'm burying the lead here. If you go to Best Buy right now, all you people out there, if you go to and you don't have Apple TV Plus, this is, go to Best Buy, search for Apple TV Plus subscription, and you will find an Apple TV Plus 3 month subscription that you can put into your shopping cart. Put it into your shopping cart, everybody, and then go to checkout. And the price of that 3 month subscription is $0.00. You don't even have to buy anything else. It's $0 for 3 months. It's just sitting there in Best Buy. I tested it this morning. It still works. I don't know how long it's going to last. So if you want Apple TV Plus for free, so you can watch Severance, because it's only 2 months, by the way, so you'll be able to watch the first season and the second season. And hey, any other Apple TV Plus shows you missed out on, you get it for free for 3 months from Best Buy. You don't even have to buy anything else. You could check out with a $0 in your shopping cart and you get a digital coupon for the service.
Amazing. But I also have to gently tease you that you just referred to buying a flat screen TV, which completely shows your age, because I don't think there's any other kind anymore.
Yes. I got a flat screen TV. I should have said I got an OLED TV because the technologies do vary. But yes, nobody's buying the old tube TVs anymore. I hope not anyway, that the 400-pound ones.
Sony Wega. Do you remember that?
Oh my God.
Oh my God. That thing was so heavy.
Oh my God. Remember when we had friends who had that house and they had a giant projector TV and it was a giant cabinet in their living room? It was just, yeah. That's the old school technology. Those TVs used to weigh, 400, 500 pounds sometimes. And now they weigh ounces. Well, I'm exaggerating, of course, but you can easily pick them up. One person can pick up one of these these flat screen TVs easily.
Even
nowadays.
I can pick up a TV now.
Exactly. Even the newest ones. This is the first OLED we had, the one we got this year, and it is much lighter than the old school one that we had. Practically a sheet of paper. Okay, so the truth shall set us free. We kick off this episode immediately following up on last week's episode. Of course, Martian admitting that he is not named Paul. And what do you think about this scene? How do you think Samia took the news here?
What I was processing while I was watching this was this feeling of, dang it, she really is not a well-developed character at all. I mean, she seemed to be really surprised, genuinely surprised by this, and trying to process everything and having, some of the anger you would expect someone to have, first at being deceived in this way, and second at being asked to kind of turn on your people.
Yeah.
But my greater overriding feeling was disappointment that she was much less dimensional than I was hoping she would be.
I mean, the one thing I would give the writing credit for here is that she is what is going on, just briefly. And then when she kind of collapses into her chair, at least that's my memory of it, she says, you're a spy. Like, so it's in a way, it kind of represented that she was in denial of something that she kind of always knew. But yeah, the rest of this, all to your point, I think Fassbender's very good in this scene. The way he's like kind of.
I thought he was great in this. I mean, I think he's great in the whole show, to be honest. Yeah. But in this episode, especially, I thought he was great.
Yeah, when you see his expression change when he's like just shaking his head and being like it's as if the weight of how ridiculous this whole thing has been on him is all coming forward, and almost like the futility of it as she pushes back. Of course, all the things that she's saying, like, I can't just abandon my family. They're still at risk. Like, what are you talking about? And it's as if he's just acknowledging to himself just how futile this whole situation is. I agree that this scene in general doesn't work that well. And the Samia character in general seems like almost like like a plot device more than a character across the board. But at the same time, I think that that scene where she just, or that moment where she just says, I don't even know you. And he just says, well, stay and find out who I am, basically, which of course seems, a pathetic thing to say at that moment. But you see him struggling with this, as if I think he really did at some point. I guess everybody has some level of self-denial. Walked in there thinking he could talk her into it and not realizing just how insane it would be to be able to convince her of all this in a moment's conversation. I thought his performance was fantastic in this scene. And I agree that this is, once again, maybe the thing that the show has not sold me on the most.
Which is supposed to be, according to the theme song that we can't stand,
right,
the central conceit of this show, right?
Right.
Which I will say, they did a lot in this episode about how people blur lines and how that causes difficulty, not just for these two, but for other characters as well. I guess I appreciate that as part of an overarching theme, but as we talked about before, like, I'm just not buying this as this undying love, even as he's explaining to her that he couldn't stay away from her and whatever. Like, it just really, what I was thinking at the time, he's explaining to her, no, my feelings were real. I couldn't leave you. I thought, like, but why? I have never seen
right.
why.
Mm-hmm.
I have never seen a compelling conversation between the two of you where it's clear that you're head over heels in love for each other. I haven't seen it. Even if it were a subplot, would not be that big a deal for me. But as kind of what's supposed to be driving so much of this, that's where the problem is for me.
Yeah, and I think that on the one hand, it is the construction of the series where, of course, we are, first of all, juggling many plot threads, and second of all, dealing thematically with the unknowability of these people, which makes it very hard to sell a romance. Those are like kind of opposite requirements in the writing of the show. But to your point, I think they could have fixed this. All we needed to have was, let's say, one half of one episode where we saw their romance in full flight back in Ethiopia or Khartoum, wherever they were back in that flashback. If we had seen a convincing sequence like that, we need that as context. I mean, all we really have as the context for their great romance is that really beautiful, and this is, I think, in the pilot episode, that beautiful flashback to them making love back in that hotel. But that, I think that's also either in that same scene or adjacent to it when he tells her that he has to leave. So even that is kind of tainted by the fact that it's just like he's always on the way out, always being shady with her, always, being duplicitous with her and like inviting her to a hotel room and then flaking out on her at midnight. All these things do not make you feel like she's going to throw her life away to be with him, right? It just doesn't seem to, make any sense.
Yeah, like 2 or 3 scenes where they talked about their childhood, or I don't know, like something stupid, cook dinner together. I don't know, something that made me feel, when you watch a couple that has chemistry, that you just enjoy watching them interacting with each other, right?
Right.
They just, for whatever reason, didn't provide that, which is just so strange when that's supposed to be what's driving so much of the story here.
And another problem, I think, is that they are both characters that are so hard and so hard to read intentionally.
Yeah.
They have these walls up with each other because they don't trust each other. And of course, have it in all their interactions with everybody else, because Martian is never with his guard down, even with his coworkers, even with people who know his actual biography. He's still being duplicitous constantly. And of course, Samia, similarly, when she's with him, she doesn't know if she can trust him. In this conference room, she's constantly worried about her own well-being. And this is only getting worse as the show progresses, obviously, culminating in this very episode. So all of that is especially making it very hard to get reads on them. And most importantly, to what you were just saying, when they're together, we don't see them be vulnerable with each other, right? If they could have some kind of, when they're together, they have this moment of respite there, that's like this island where they can be vulnerable in this world where they can never be vulnerable. There would be something that would see like, well, of course they are drawn to each other. It's the only time they can let their guards down. But when they're with each other, this is kind of circling back to the critiques I've had of previous episodes. When they're alone together, have their fists up, their hackles up, whatever you want to describe it as. They're
Right.
constantly wary of each other. So it's like
Right.
I don't understand. Like it's just more of the same, right? It's not
Right.
an alternative to it. And once again, you could have that now, like they are trying to negotiate this new world that they're in London. If we saw that back in the past, like you said, just one moment where maybe Martian has a fake biography and she asks him some question and you see him give her an actual answer, reveal something actually personal about himself. And you could see at least that he had found that in her, right? But we don't see any of that. Like we really don't see that. We just are supposed to take it at face value that they were madly in love with each other, despite the fact that there is no evidence of this at all. It almost makes it feel like that her read of this, that, when she talks to Osman about it later, that she feels like, oh, I was a mark. He was targeting me the whole time. Somehow he knew this, like I would be in this circumstance here in London ahead of time. Like this was all a play. I can understand her having that read because she must feel like I can't trust a word this guy's ever said to me, right? And that does not feel like someone who you loved like deeply in the past.
Right. And I think that's kind of why I could have gone with it if she had had her suspicions all along. If she was like a more shady character herself who had a lot to hide. Any of those things, at least I think, could have balanced it a little bit for me. This, I'm kind of like, oh, it really was what it seemed to be on the surface, more or less. And then it's like I didn't even have a way to make an excuse for her, kind of.
Yeah. Another nitpick I'll have about this episode, by the way, is how loudly they are arguing in that room. He even like tries to overturn that chair. And I'm like, is it Osman like right outside the door?
I didn't notice it at the time, maybe because I was just paying such close attention to what was happening. It's a good point, though.
She may have the skill level to be a spy, though, because when she's back in the car with Osman, she's able to shift gears.
Right.
Although you can read on her face that she's pretty troubled. This maybe in some ways parallels some of what happens to Danny as well later on, where she is not really, doesn't have a great poker face. Naomi calls her out on that.
Yeah, well, and I mean, this is kind of what I was thinking about when I was saying earlier, it is a theme throughout the episode of just, where do you draw those lines? Because once you start feeling any kind of real human emotion for somebody, then you can't objectively treat them like a target anymore.
And I mean, Martian has that issue here as well.
Yeah, and I mean, that's spelled out. It's not like that was some nuance. I mean, it's literally said. So.
Yeah, like we'll have much more to say in those regards later in this episode when we get to the Danny storyline specifically.
And the other storyline, who I'm going to completely forget their names, involving the secretary, where it's the opposite, very cold and calculated. And here's the deal. This is what we're doing. And if we lose someone, so be it.
Yeah, and it's interesting thematically. That's kind of something that I like about the show is that they definitely have a theme in the episode that they're exploring. So in this regard, does the truth set you free? And we see the positive consequences, negative consequences of being upfront about things. But also what's interesting to your point broadly, I think this is a theme of the series in general. This character, Blair, that you mentioned, which I do want to call out that I don't think we've mentioned her barely at all in the entirety of the show, although she's been in every single episode and actually been doing really good work. She's always just been like a tertiary character up until now. So I like to see her be a little more in the foreground. And I have a feeling that maybe even more. So this actress is Ambreen Razia. And as you mentioned, she's in Belarus. She happens to go visit this secretary who just got introduced last week and didn't last very long on the series, Sylvia, who is Volchek, what's his name?
I think Volchek.
General Volchek's secretary. And they think, oh, here's somebody who could potentially be an asset, and really throw her under the bus for a number of reasons. Because, I mean, I have a couple of theories here that I think are even more troubling than that. First of all, like you mentioned, Blair actually has to go and get debriefed because, long story short, things go terribly wrong for this secretary. They recruit her pretty much against her will. And of course, Volchek is ahead of the game and sets up this whole test for her I also have some kind of situation going on here.
Sounds like it. It's the time of year, honestly.
It is. This whole sequence is pretty interesting. First of all, they ask, are there any things that we could, anything that he carries on him all the time that we could obviously place some kind of tracking device on or monitoring device? And they decide the boots are the best option. And let's save that for a moment because I think boots are a terrible option.
I mean, here's the thing. What I didn't understand, and maybe this is particular to me, but when I wear something day in and day out,
Oh, absolutely.
you have a sense of like,
Yes.
right, what it should feel like. And
Yeah.
shoes, especially, are such a specific thing as far as how they're broken in
Right.
and what they feel like on your feet. I feel like I would notice right away if there was a pair of shoes I wore every day and somebody replaced them. I think I would definitely know.
Yes, this is my biggest complaint about this episode. By the way, this might be a completely moot point because as soon as the whole sequence plays out, he invites her, he sets up the situation. He literally is naked except for his boots. So it's like gives her this perfect opportunity. When she swaps the boots out, he immediately sticks his head out of the sauna and goes, "Oh, there's something different about you. What is it? Oh, it's your hair. Yeah, your hair looks good." And of course, this whole interaction happened in the hair salon in English, but who knows? He might have it monitored. He might have a spy in there. Someone who worked there might have just approached him. And not only that, he's probably ahead of the game here because this is just my thinking. If I had a CIA operative in my grasp, literally days away from handing him over to Putin himself, I would assume that the CIA already knows what's happening, right? Like my alerts would be set so high, my sensitivity would be set so high. I would be looking for, I would just assume, the CIA has basically infiltrated everybody currently.
I mean, he says to her, the exact words were, "Have you done something?" And then there's a lull. "Different with your hair?"
Right.
So, yeah. And I also want to say this is neither here nor there, but the basket that she's carrying in that scene, I have the exact same one, and it's from Target.
Well, yeah. So I don't know if she shopped at Target. Well, Target's international, so maybe they're in Belarus. Who knows?
Maybe.
More pertinently is the fact that I think that
You're like, let me just get you back on message.
away from the Target basket. But
once I start talking about Target, that's it. 20 minutes on Target.
I knew I was just trying to rein you in before you got full head of steam ahead of you. This is obviously a test. He may have even known the content of that conversation, but regardless. So I think he's ahead of her, way ahead of her, and this is all a test. So this may have all been a moot point, period. Regardless of a boot point, right? It might have been completely, it wouldn't have mattered even if it was a pair of glasses or whatever. He would have already been ahead of her. So this might not have mattered. But let's go back to, once again, of all the things. I literally was thinking about the time when we were at a party together at a friend's apartment and I put on, we've all done this before, everybody leaves their shoes at the door and I put on the wrong pair of shoes, right? My brown boots looked like someone else's brown boots. And I didn't even have to put both feet in. As soon as I put my first foot in, I'm like, this isn't my shoe. You know what your shoe feels like. This is like a terrible, terrible idea for multiple reasons. But
yes.
Well, but going back to your point of how there is a certain cold calculation here, you see that Blair is then being debriefed by Dr. Blake. I have a much more cynical read of this. This is all part of the CIA's operation, that they don't care if Volchek knows that they're onto him because they want to force him to move Coyote. And then they have some plan. And if that's the case, then that is, and maybe I'm being overly cynical in that read, but if that does turn out to be the case, that means that basically the CIA itself is manipulating their agents in the same way that those agents are manipulating these assets in the field, where the CIA is telling Blair she's going to manage this new asset when they really don't care if that asset ends up dead. They really have like a broader intention. And the reason I make that connection is because we almost see Naomi say that explicitly to Danny later in the episode. So anyway, very, very bad news for Sylvia, obviously.
Very grim for Sylvia.
Yeah.
Poor thing.
Another weird aspect to the storyline, by the way, is I find it interesting to see Henry and Bosco's multiple interactions here, where they are suddenly really fixated on whether they can get Samia to become an asset and find out what's happening inside that room. Because on the one hand, obviously, this is a really important piece of information, maybe the most important thing that's happening in the context of this whole entire show, even more so than the coyote thing, which is really just symbolically, hey, we caught a CIA agent. And if you wanted to, the US could just be like, he's not even an agent. He's just some drunk guy from Russia. So there are ways they can handle that may not be so derogatory. This whole negotiation of whether China ends up controlling the Red Sea is obviously something that has maybe potentially much more high stake geopolitical outcomes or consequences. So this is potentially the most important thing that's happening. But I like the fact that they're acting like this is absolutely important. We have to get in the room when they didn't even know about this an episode ago. And now all of a sudden it's like their number one priority. Not that it isn't the number one priority, but just the fact that like, so you mean like if by chance Martian had not said anything to you last week, you would not even be aware that this is happening. And now it's so important to you.
There is a comment at some point, I can't remember the context of who makes it, about how the Chinese are always one step ahead. Right. The Americans. So I guess it follows that theme.
That definitely is what they try to project, right? They have this annual meeting in China that they talk about how they meet and they plan for the next 100 years, which on the one hand is obviously, I think, the way that, I mean, culturally, that 100-year window is something that the Chinese talk about, like kind of having that long-term view. And they're always strategizing for the future. But I also think it's kind of like a mythology they build about their planning in a way to weaponize that, to make these economic enemies more wary of them. Because, I mean, look at what's happening with the Chinese economy right now as it's struggling and, you know, honestly, in a really, really bad spot currently. So it's like, what happened to that 100-year plan? You guys kind of missed the ball in the last 5 years. I'm not sure what, you know, they have not recovered from the pandemic, for example. And they have these cities that they've built, you know, with that will house millions of people that are completely falling apart because there's nobody living in these ghost cities. So it's like, I don't know. Like, I think maybe the 100-year plan is a little overstated, but it is definitely what they, you know, how they present themselves. All right. I do want to talk about like truths and non-truths throughout the course of this episode, but one of them, maybe the shadiest character on this whole entire show, emerging as it is Papa Paddington here.
Oh yeah.
Hugh Bonneville. And I always forget the character's name. It's Richardson. So, okay. So Richardson, this UK operative who's popped up, you know, just popped up in the middle of the season, just having a casual conversation with Martian out on his patio, and Martian lets slip, not slip, he intentionally tells him some of what's happening here. He then shows up the very next day at CIA headquarters as if he's the source of this information. And Martian is immediately like, whoa, what is going on with this guy? And then he shows up here and he's just like, hey, look, I'm just letting you know what the Chinese are up to. And I'm not involved with this. This is on you. Like British intelligence has given up on the Middle East a long time ago. What does he say? I'm only here to blow on your dice, which is like, you know, good luck with your next roll of the dice. I'm not here to roll the dice. I'm just here to blow on them and wish you good luck. That's what he says. But surprise, surprise, by the end of this episode, who is the leak to the Chinese? It's he himself. And I actually found this a really great twist, because I'm thinking like, whoa, what's his game? He's playing everybody right now, right? And then of course, via him, we really have to think about the British Secret Service itself. What are they up to? Because they are obviously hosting the CIA in this building and potentially monitoring them, monitoring the Chinese. And it's as if they are pulling strings, but never the center of attention. So I really found this really interesting. I still don't know how it's all going to play out, but I thought this was a really clever twist, that when we're thinking about like, how is this information passing back and forth? And it's the British agency itself that might be doing it. It's pretty a surprising turn of events.
I thought it was a great twist. And I thought also, I don't know if you felt this way, I was surprised that it felt like there was very little fanfare around the reveal.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like it was just very matter of
so
fact.
casual. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just there, looking at these like Chinese artifacts. But the reason I bring him up is exactly for what you were saying before, the Chinese in general and their positioning about, being ahead of the game all the time when potentially they're ahead of the game because they're getting this additional information. But I found his perspective really interesting because it's as if he's saying to the Chinese agent, we, the British, have all these Chinese artifacts, which of course the Chinese are angry about. They complain about this, that there's a lot of their culture that is in these museums in the West. He's making it sound like, oh yeah, that's how it was at one time. And it's still like that now, right? Wink, wink, as in he's acknowledging the fact that the Chinese have the upper hand in this situation, obviously. But I still do think that the Hugh Bonneville character, Richardson, is actually playing the Chinese in some way. So I do, even his performance saying, well, you guys hold all the cards now. Even that I think is part of this manipulation that's going on. And I'm really intrigued to see how it's all going to play out. It's interesting, even they bring this up a few times, just to close the circle on that, what might be happening among the Chinese, that they talk about how these pirates in the Red Sea have attacked multiple times these Chinese ships. And the Hugh Bonneville character, also Bosco, presents this in one of those meetings where Dr. Blake is there, like you mentioned. I'm like, why exactly is Dr. Blake in this meeting?
So many meetings that, I think she's there as a device to voice the human, compassionate side of things so that gets said out loud so they can have that conversation. But yes, strategically speaking, it makes no sense in an industry that is very much about being on a need to know basis.
Right.
Why this lady is in so many high security meetings.
And the funniest part about it is I had mentioned, I think just in the very last episode when we were discussing this, yes, she's in some meetings, but there's certain things they are keeping from her. And then in this particular case, Bosco shows this footage of the pirates invading the Chinese ship. And he's supposing that now the Chinese are coming to send reinforcements to protect their ships, which of course is a way to hide a military action, right? So they're reading it this way. And by the way, going all the way to the final conversation, Richardson says that to the Chinese agent and he goes, we're not involved with that. And he's just like, whatever, right? So no one trusts that that's the case. So that's all kind of tying together. But going back to the Dr. Blake situation, I find it so funny that she's there and I'm like, well, she doesn't know everything that's going on. And then Henry's just like, well, we got this Chinese agent. I'm just like, so even the stuff she's not privy to for being in the room, he's just telling her like they trust this woman a lot.
Yes. And she just has this, at least in this episode, she just has this vaguely horrified look for the entire episode.
Yes, they're just filling out all these things that are going on. And she's like, what is going on?
It's like she's literally thinking like, this is above my pay grade. And I wish I didn't know any of this.
Well, they have a unqualified trust in her, which I find very funny. They probably trust her in this show anyway, in the context of the show. They're trusting her with stuff they probably wouldn't tell Martian to his face. And it's kind of funny. And I'm like, okay, she could just know everything about everybody, apparently. Right. So. All right, let's talk about Naomi and Danny. We'll talk about Sammy and Osman because that is great. Actually, all those scenes between the two of them are very strong, but let's save that for a little bit later. Let's talk about Naomi and Danny first. This is some truth telling here for sure, and a lot of obfuscation on Danny's part, obviously. So first of all, Naomi reaches out to Danny, says, how are things going? I scared off. Danny tells her that she's scared off that first guy. But now, of course, this woman, Rose, who's become an actual friend of hers inside of the institution, she believes that Rose is ahead of her. So Naomi goes, well, what do you plan to do about that to discover whether she is competition for you again? She invites her over. They drink a little. She asks her directly. And Rose says, yep, indeed, she has gotten the offer to go to Iran and she's going to take him up on it. She could have at least, by the way, when she brings up the fact like, hey, would you go if this was you? She could have told Rose, are you sure? Maybe, isn't it kind of dangerous out there? She could have at least pretended to, instead of being like, of course you should go. That's a great opportunity. I mean, that is what a friend would say, but I don't know if it's really doing what she's hoping to accomplish there.
Yeah.
Unless I guess, she's thinking long term that, of course, if she decides to stay behind, she could have been the supportive friend the whole entire time. So that is, it's one way you could read it.
I thought maybe it was setting up that when she is eventually asked to go, she's already said that she would jump at this opportunity. So
Right.
the friend will
Yes, it would all make
understand.
sense. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would play better if she's saying that, oh, it's too dangerous. I would never go. And then, of course, she jumps at it. It would make her
Right.
seem duplicitous after the fact and could potentially have some detrimental view of her cover story in the future. So, yeah, maybe. I guess that all plays out. And then you see her, this actress is actually very good. You can see, and kind of transparent, her facial expressions, to be honest. So maybe not great for an agent. Good for an actress, not great for an agent. Because you could see the wheel spinning on her face where she's like, oh no, what am I going to do now? And then she's like, let's go out and party. So they go out, they dance, they drink, they make out, they definitely take MDMA, and then they do lines of, I don't know if they're doing Coke or Special K, but quite a concoction, quite a night these girls are having, I got to say.
Yes.
I would not mix all those things together, to be honest. This is a very interesting moment, by the way. In the bathroom, she says, tell me something personal about yourself. And what she comes up with is the fact that her mom, she has multiple sclerosis, right? Is that correct?
Yes. And let me just clarify or add some color. She says, what makes you happy? What makes you sad? That's
right. Correct.
It was first like, yeah, tell me something I don't know about you. And then she drills down by saying, like, what makes you sad?
And that was the fact that her mom is dying and wants to euthanize herself, but she's getting pushed back from her family, which is more devout and worried about. Obviously, suicide is considered a serious sin. I mean, in many religions, but in the Catholic religions, in this particular case. So she reveals that about herself, but some bad spy work, I think, the fact that when she says, well, you tell me something about yourself, Danny, and she says nothing, like you got to be ready to back up your
something. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, make it up, right? Say like, oh, my uncle went through the same thing. He had cancer. And you know what I mean? Like you got to be ready to say something. You can't just sit there and be like, smirk at her and walk out of the bathroom. So you could see that Danny has some learning to do still, for sure. And that gets more pronounced over the course of this episode, I think, honestly. And this culminates with Danny. I mean, Naomi takes Danny to go see her mother. She really surprises her with this. I am honestly
insane what happens here.
I have a question for you. We talked about how is the Iran story, and I could be 100% wrong about this, and I have not seen the original series, so maybe I'm completely off the mark on this. But I'm wondering more and more so, because you mentioned like, how is this Iran thing going to dovetail with the rest of the story?
If at all, right.
If at all, right. I mean, we only have 2 more episodes to go, and I do not think Danny's going to be on a plane to Iran next week. I don't believe so. I have a theory, and tell me what you think about this, that none of this has any consequence at all. This is all Danny being tested by the agency. Does that make sense to you?
I mean, we have already seen them overtly test her once, right, with the kidnapping. Right. So, yeah, it could be that before they put her in a situation where it's really going to matter, they're kind of running these drills on her.
Imagine this guy is just the professor, and the cover story is that he's, attached to the Iranian government in some way. Makes sense on the surface. And now, for example, if they beat her up and she shows up at work and they're like, oh, this is really suspicious, especially if he's like an insider in Iran, and they start asking, hey, we've heard some chatter. Is there anyone in your group that could be suspicious? And he'd be like, well, that Danny girl, this thing happened and that thing happened. And everybody around her, fell by the wayside. And then she ended up coming with me to Iran. Like all these things could be very suspicious. And it's not to say that that's not how the agency would do this. It's just that, would you trust her when she's completely untested to potentially blow an operation? So that's what made me think that like, this is all an illusion. All of this is just a test for her. And these people are earnestly playing their roles because they don't know what's going on either, right? It's like the perfect type of test, right? Where she thinks something's going on, they are not. And then, of course, if she starts to overread their behavior and starts to suspect too much about these people who are not involved at all, then the agency will be like, well, that's a ding against her too, right? I don't want someone who's paranoid. I want someone who's accurate.
Right.
So anyway, I think could all be an operation, or I should say a test for her.
Fair point.
Do you think they're snorting cocaine or MDMA? I mean, not MDMA, what I'm talking about, or Special K. I mean, the kids now do Special K. They don't really snort cocaine, but I don't know if I would want to be doing Special K at a rave. I don't know if that's my combination that I'd go for.
Dude, I am the last person that has an answer to this question. Like, it's wild and crazy to me if I have like wine and a cocktail on the same night. So
liquor and beer mixed together is way too much.
yeah, I don't know. All I can tell you is that there was an explicit reference to MDMA. That's all I got.
Those are the tabs, though, that she has, which I do not think she got from the bartender. I think she had them with her.
I agree with you there.
Before we get into the Naomi scene, which is so important to this, I do want to talk about the fact that while they're out partying, Martian comes home. Poppy's there with her latest friend,
oh my gosh,
her study partner.
There were more naked men in this episode than there have been in the whole rest of the series.
Oh, I was trying to think who else, but yes, because Volchek, right, is naked as well. Yeah, dude, I mean, I understand where I'm trying to make this scene make sense to me, and Poppy obviously just had a close encounter with some nefarious agents last week, so I can imagine her being like, "Oh my God, there's someone in the house. My dad's not home." She could overreact to be like, "Can you go check it out?" That I can totally buy. The fact that, like, if I think I might be getting into an altercation with somebody, that I wouldn't even just put my boxer shorts on is an absolutely insane action. And that she let him walk out that way is the craziest thing of all.
And just his socks.
He did put his socks on. Very good point. Why did he have his socks on?
I assume the socks were on the entire.
Just stayed on. Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Cold feet. We don't know how warm that apartment is. There's no curtains anywhere.
Yeah, you know what? There was something that happened in this episode, and I can't remember what it is, but I have not spent much time in the UK myself, but something that happened in this episode made me feel like if I were in the UK, I would feel cold a lot of the time.
Well, that's what I've heard.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I've heard in general. Rainy London weather.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, this, but like my family's from Portugal, and even when the weather's still pretty cold, like even May, where the water would seem way too cold for sunbathing or to going to the beach, the British love to vacation in the south, even when the temperature, to us would seem too cold. Right. Because for them that's kind of as good as it gets during the peak of the summer months. So they'll take it. So anyway, I think that is like a stereotype, but pretty accurate. It's basically like Seattle weather, right? Where Seattle has these absolutely beautiful summers, but it is a very rainy, but at least not very cold temperature the rest of the time. Anyway, back to this scene. It's pretty funny. This kid tries to shake his hand. I'm definitely not shaking your hand, buddy.
He takes it in stride, though. All around, I think he had a good reaction.
This is an interesting dynamic. I really like this whole interaction between him and Poppy, especially afterwards. All of it I thought was so good because, yes, Martian is way too laid back in a lot of ways versus the stereotypical reaction that you would see in a show with this dad. But I think to myself, first of all, he's a spy. It's not like he's going to be like shocked by a lot of this behavior. Second of all, he's pretty estranged from his daughter. I think the last thing he wants to be is to have disappeared for 6 years and just starting to build a relationship with her and suddenly start getting all judgmental about her. Exactly. So I think all of this played out perfectly for me.
And he even teases her, right, about what happened to the other guy. It was cute.
Exactly. I thought you were dating.
Yeah.
And he's like, is this a real guy? Like, is it for real? Do I have to get to know him, or is this just a passing thing? Very strangely, by the way, he tells her that he's proud of her. He's proud of her. I mean, he said he's proud of her because he thinks that she's turning into a cool adult, not a little girl anymore. So that's actually kind of sweet that he can have that long-term perspective. But she reads it as like, I'm proud of you for having sex with this guy. And she's just like, not what I want to be thinking about.
Yes.
My dad is proud of me while I'm having sex. Very good. Very good point, right? Like, you don't really want to be thinking about your parents.
There shouldn't be any intersection of those worlds.
Exactly. Ever. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and once again, these two actors have great chemistry with each other. Michael Fassbender, when he laughs at her reaction, seems to be like an actual laughing in the moment. It's really perfect casting.
Yes.
The chemistry between him and his love interest, not as
Not so
compelling.
much. Yes.
I know. Unfortunate. Let's jump to Samia, and then we go back to Danny again, because that's kind of the sequence in the episode as well. Samia goes back to the negotiation table, proving that she is not actually some kind of double or triple agent at this point. It's just like the weight of all of this. By the way, there's an argument between the Sudanese and I don't know the geography of that area, unfortunately, who are refusing to negotiate in English, and all of this, the tension in the moment or whatever, she passes out. And then the truth shall set you free remains to be seen if this is true or not. But she does tell Osman everything when he goes to nurse her elbow in the bathroom. Apparently, she hit her elbow when she hit the ground, and she tells him everything. Oh, before we move on to the content of that conversation, I do want to mention, of course, on monochrome alert, the purple outfit.
Beautiful. Yes.
I did wonder if maybe you have to rewatch the show in this case, if this is, I'm thinking about like the color wheel here. She was red, I think, at the beginning of the series, and now we're in purple. So maybe we're working our way towards the end of the rainbow here with their relationship as well. So maybe this is the last we'll see of her.
Interesting.
It remains to be seen. But I was thinking along the way, I'm like, we have seen her in blue, we've seen her in orange, we've seen her in yellow, right? We've seen her, and now here she is in purple, right? So maybe that was just her plan every day of, although I don't think this whole thing happened in 7 days, but I did like the scene, by the way. I did like the way this was shot. This is a different director than last week. I did like to see her looking at herself in the mirror and the way her face is like split in half. And of course, there's this whole decision she's trying to make in that moment as to whether she goes back to her old life, whether she starts a new life. She decides to come clean. She can't trust Martian. I think this is legit, by the way. The way she presents it to Osman is not only does she tell him everything, obviously truth telling here as a theme in this episode of television, but beyond that, she also couches this in a way, and I think this is true. She is playing this out as the CIA has been watching me. Somehow they knew I would be here doing this before I even knew. And Osman doesn't push back on her saying like, no, you're an operative. I know. Osman goes, they knew everything all along. Like he takes her side. And I think this is actually sold. Surprisingly, this worked for me. Sold in this moment that Osman, all of this protectiveness he's been doing towards her hasn't been antagonistic. He wants to protect her for real. I think he has feelings for her.
Honestly, I was shocked at how much Osman came through for her here.
He did. And I bought it. That's the other thing that was surprising. This could be such a convenient twist. I think it's in the performance. This actor is very good. I told you, I just saw him in that, in a very different role, a Big Pain.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He was so good in that as well. A very different role, obviously very tender type character. But here you see him soften towards her, and I bought it as if the show is trying to tell us for real that he's trying to protect her. Later on, when he tells everything to the people who are managing this negotiation, they say, we'll take care of everything else. You just take care of the girl. Take care of the girl sounds like a threat, but that is not what Osman is planning, right? Osman is planning to get her out of there and put her somewhere where she can be protected.
Yeah, I was really surprised and impressed. And I liked this development of Osman's character, that he really does want to look out for her.
It's Darfur, by the way, that those other people refuse to speak English. Yeah, and he's worried too. He's obviously worried for her. He's worried for this entire negotiation. This goes back to the conversation she had with Martian even, but then she's saying it here as well. She won't betray her people, right? She actually wants these negotiations to be successful.
Yeah, this to me seems true to her character and what we've seen so far.
I think it's also interesting to think about how the personal and geopolitics don't intersect. He obviously personally wants this relationship with her to succeed, and he wants to protect her because he knows that she may be in danger. So that's the personal side of things. But I think it's interesting how disconnected the personal and the geopolitical are, because she wants the Chinese to negotiate this accord, and it's the exact opposite of what of the CIA wants. Right? So it's interesting how she is really caught in the middle of these two things. And once again, I think the themes, this is why I like the show so much. I think thematically that is really interesting and compelling, that these people who have personal entanglements may want geopolitically very, very different results. And then, of course, that the idea that you can somehow disconnect your personal and political beliefs from your actions day to day and as an agent is so preposterous. And I think the show gets that so right. So I forgive it some of the missteps it makes, which honestly, I think from at a character level, most of these characters work really well.
I agree.
Even the performance of Samia when she is trapped and she's trying to get out of her circumstance and she's making her case when she's angry and she's trying to extricate herself from a situation. I actually buy those individual character beats. I just don't see it, like going back to that discussion we had at the top of this episode, the Martian Samia relationship. I just don't see it.
No, I agree. I know I was very critical of it and I stand by that, but it doesn't mean that I'm not enjoying this show and enjoying the characters and enjoying the storylines. I just see it as a very big weakness of the overall dynamic that they're trying to create.
Yeah. Especially like you said, that, this is all about how love is blindness.
Exactly. Don't subject us to that song every week if you're not going to back it up.
If you're not going to back it up, exactly. It's so blind you don't even know you're not in love with the other person. That's how blind you are.
You never even realize that you don't know anything about them.
Exactly. Okay, so let's get back to one of the most fascinating moments in this entire season of show, honestly, the Naomi, Danny interactions in the car. And I think this is so interesting because it says something about the themes of the show, obviously, but it says something that is exemplifying something about Naomi, for example, how she is teaching Danny one thing when I'm not sure she is actually complying with that herself, which I think happens over and over again in this show as well, right? Like Martian was the first trainer for Danny, and there's so much bad parenting basically going on here, right? Where do as I say, not as I do, basically. Yeah. This is what you're supposed to be doing. Even if I don't do that, even if I know you're not doing that, it's all of that is really fascinating. But they show up at Rose's mother's house, and Naomi really throws her under the bus. She's just like, I'm not even giving you context to what I'm going to do here. I'm going to hand it off to you at some point, and you just have to, once again, go into the idea that if this was really mission critical, is this how you would handle this? I think this is a test. Definitely, it's a test, regardless of what else is going on here. And it turns out, we're here not to just get some more personal information on Rose. We're actually here to offer a trip, like to fund her euthanization, right?
Yes.
Then, hey, would you please close the deal for us? And she hands it off to Danny. And I like the way that Danny, when Danny's looking at the mom, but Rose's picture is in the background, yes, it actually focuses on the photograph over her shoulder rather than on the mother herself. So that's what she's thinking about, like how she's betraying this friend of hers. And, now Danny's thinking for real, like, we're actually killing this person. This person may want this, but at the same time, they are literally paying to kill somebody for this mission.
Yes.
And that's the conversation that occurs in the car as well, when Danny obviously bristles at this. Naomi, of course, calls her out that you did a terrible job. If we were in front of Volchek or something, you would have given yourself away in seconds. But of course, this is just some kindly old lady that is suspecting nothing at all. And you still did an absolutely terrible job.
I mean, she did not set her up for success, right? So
absolutely not. Yeah.
It felt a little bit unnecessary to criticize her at that level, because I was thinking we didn't really see the conversation. But it seems like the type of thing that you maybe would have done a couple of Google searches on if you knew you were going to have to be presenting some plan to bring somebody to another country for euthanasia.
Right.
So I don't know how well she winged it or didn't, but I wouldn't be surprised if you blew it in that situation. Naomi, I think, is dealing with her own.
Right.
We didn't talk about this yet. I'm not sure if you were going to touch on it, but that one tech guy has outed Martian as
Mm-hmm.
asking about Samia at a date that was earlier. Then Martian is admitting that he met Samia. And so she's trying to wrap her head around what's going on with Martian and what it means and her feelings about it. And so I'm sure that's translating into other areas of her life as well.
Yeah, specifically in that conversation, Naomi is teaching her this philosophy that there are two circles. This is where I say that thematically this is really broad. Saying it's telling even of Naomi herself. She says there's two circles, the friend circle, and then you have enemies. So that's all you have. So anybody who's outside of that inner circle is an enemy. So Rose is not her friend. Rose is an enemy. Like viewing your actual assets even and presenting to them. Think about the duplicity of this, which of course is what's being investigated in this whole entire series. Presenting to someone, like for example, being a handler to someone and saying, I'm handling this person, I'm compassionate towards them, but that is all a ruse because they are actually your enemy. Therefore, you can do anything you want to these people. They're disposable in a large sort of way. And I don't think it's a mistake that we go directly from this scene to the outcome for Sylvia eventually, right? Because she, of course, is this collateral damage. And honestly, no one ever took her well-being into any of these calculations.
No, not at all.
I mean, maybe Blair did a little bit just because she sees her as a bystander, and feels personally culpable for her bad outcome. But that is a pretty cursory involvement with someone you've just met, obviously. Once again, really interesting to consider the fact that they're not like, we need to protect these assets. If they're not part of the game, they are an enemy, and they are an enemy of the state. And she explicitly says it, right? Saying Rose is an enemy. Rose's mother is an enemy. So of course, how do you approach your enemies? You don't have to show them any kind of compassion. Mm-hmm. But of course, that's the irony of this whole entire thing. We know that Naomi's too close. She is personally offended when she discovers in this episode that Martian has lied to her, offended by his unprofessional behavior, almost protecting him and his relationship with Samia, even though we know that she has personal feelings towards him, right? So she, once again, it's like this bad parenting style of do as I say, not as I do, where she's expecting the child to, the agent in this case, obviously, but their mentee to behave at a level that they will not achieve themselves. And I think that's, once again, the commentary here that none of these people are actually following their own rules. And that's how this thing is all operating.
Right.
Of course, when we get to the very end of the episode, we're going to talk about Sylvia's outcome, although we kind of teased it already. But before then, we have that whole sequence we already touched on where the British agent Richardson meets up with this Chinese agent in this museum in London, which I'm not familiar with, but apparently has a wing of Chinese artifacts. He has chosen this place for them to meet and uses it as a little lesson to this younger agent about the history of the interactions between the British Empire, the ancient British Empire, and its dominance over China, which ended, they still controlled Hong Kong, right, until not that long ago. So all of this is changing very much so in the current moment. And speaking of how the truth shall set you free, I find it very interesting that he is obviously being nefarious here, still working behind the scenes, and yet makes this proposal to the Chinese agent that, hey, if you have something to trade, you can go directly to the Americans. All the cards have been kind of let out on the table here. It's interesting that there is still manipulation happening even as these things are being put out in the open. Yeah, and then there's that scene you mentioned already. Naomi goes to speak to this analyst who had done the Samia background check and asks him the date. What date was it? It was the day before they supposedly met in person. Naomi, of course, immediately knows what's going on, grabs the phone out of his hand. I think that's very interesting to talk to Martian directly and says, we need to meet right now. Goes up to his office. Rather than him acknowledging what she's saying, and he tries to say, oh, no, maybe I got the date wrong. I guess the analysts got the date wrong, whatever. She's just like, I'm not buying this for a second. She knows exactly what's going on. And he just shuts her down by saying, I have seen you already. Get out of my office,
Yes.
which
Mhm.
I'm not sure that's the right way to handle that. But then at the same time, I don't think she would have bought any other pitch. I didn't mention this all the way at the beginning of this episode, but they had made the approach to Samia, of course. And she's like, I'm absolutely out. But he said, give it 24 hours and consider it again.
Yes.
She had called in to say, I'm ready to make the meet within that 24-hour period. They go back to the university. Bosco's there. Henry's there. Martian is all there waiting for Samia to show up.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it's not Samia. It's this Chinese agent. Basically says, hey, we know what's going on. We're going to make a negotiation anyway. And Bosco does say, well, I need some kind of quid pro quo, right? I deal with information. Do you have information for me? And of course, Hugh Bonneville, once again, pulling all these levers. The British agent has a USB that has the identity of 2 Russian agents that are currently working in the US Energy Department, and has given this to the Chinese agent as a peace offering for this very moment. Once again, he is coordinating all of this. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what his overall agenda is. Is he getting that information from the Russians? Who knows how complex this web of deceit might be. But I'm really intrigued to see how it all plays out. This meeting at this moment is all coordinated by him. He has leaked the information to the Chinese and now is giving them the information to negotiate this exit. Think about it. This is to have the Americans back off and allow the negotiation to continue. So what does the UK earn by allowing this negotiation with the Chinese to continue? I don't know what that answer is, but it is interesting that he is pulling strings, but once again, never in the limelight.
Yeah, I don't know either what they have to gain.
And it is just enough information, right? I can imagine. I was actually watching this scene thinking of the calculus on Bosco's side, for example, that what he might be considering. This is something tangible, right? If we have these agents inside of the US, that could be something that could have some very negative consequences in the near term. So here, I have this win. And then even if the Chinese negotiation is going on, and now we don't know where they're moving it to, we still know that it is happening. How much value would there be in having somebody in the room right now, right? This is all kind of blown. So this is a pretty good win for them. Once again, from a chess perspective, nobody made a big move, but no one actually lost ground either. So it's kind of like, okay, I'll take this. It's a good middle ground to be in at this point from a political perspective. Of course, there's a moment where we see Martian's face, a Fassbender, who of course is very concerned because he was hoping to reunite with Samia. And we do get a reunion here. And maybe the only time I see tenderness between these two characters in this exit at the end of the episode.
There were a lot of great close-up shots of his face when they were meeting with the Chinese guy, where you could really see a lot of emotions playing across his face. I thought it was really well done.
I've said this before. I think the difference between a TV actor and a movie actor is that a movie actor needs to be someone who you can project their face at like 40 feet tall, and you can find their compelling, like when they're not talking, their faces are compelling to look at. They don't have to be beautiful. They have to be compelling, right? And I think that is what makes an actor versus a TV actor where, you have 5 people on the screen at the same time and you're delivering a punchline or something. It's a very different style of acting. And what I thought about as I was watching this show when it began was that other than him looking tough and acting cool, I thought his performance was a little one note. And I feel like it's as if he's been, reining himself in, because I had the same impression that you had here, where multiple times just seeing his face, just seeing how the scene is playing out and how he's receiving the information was really, really potent. And it's as if we've not seen the real Martian. And now we're seeing that there is a sensitive aspect to himself that is shielded by all this armor, but that we're seeing it bleed through, and that maybe that he is conflicted, to say the least, or at least emotionally damaged by all of this, but we're seeing it seep through in some ways. And I thought this was really good. I think restraining as much as he has, maybe negative for us buying into this romance. Going back to that point again,
Yes, maybe
but
so.
but here in the moment, really well done to see him yearning for that reunion with Samia and not getting it, obviously, and also just concerned with what's going to happen to her next.
Yes.
Because if he can't walk, she's not in London, and he doesn't know where she's going, then that's obviously a big problem for him. And even though we've already touched on it a few times, I do want to talk about the amount of time they spend on, poor Sylvia. This whole sequence is really heartbreaking.
It's so awful.
And all of it, right? He tells her she's going to get a raise and he's just playing with her. You really get to see Volchek as a really cruel person here, right? He doesn't just kill her anonymously. Like he literally could just have someone come behind and shoot her in the back of the head, saying she's going to get a raise and making her put the shoes on. And it's all of this is brutal. And he ties them tighter. Oh, these shoes are a little loose. Going back to your point of like, you idiot, how'd you think I was not going to know that the shoes were different? By the way, not her job to know that, but the boots were a stupid idea. Although, like I said, I am pretty sure even in the way that he teases her here, he knew everything. He knew where she made the approach. He brings up the hair salon again, right? So I think he had presumed that she could be a access point, was monitoring her, probably not just her, monitoring anybody who could potentially get in his way, I think. And then, of course, him literally walking out naked, except for his boots, out to the sauna. He didn't put slippers on. He wore his work boots. It was as if he was just saying, like, I'm going to make this as easy as possible for you to see if you take the bait. And then she did. And now she's an enemy now, right? Just going back to the whole conversation with Naomi. So he's just like, okay, you're garbage to me. And of course, poor Sylvia, who had not an agent in any way, although she has been watching Volchek kill people in front of her face. But you know what? Everybody's got to get a job somewhere, and he probably gets paid very well. Maybe this is chickens coming home to roost for her, but still very sad that she's way over her head.
It was very grim.
And of course, this is what is the impetus for Volchek to move Coyote. It's interesting to have Coyote under the burlap sack for a period of time. I was like, oh my God, does he have the wrong guy? But no, it is Coyote. We see the guy's face in the very final moments. But just the way it's shot, like where they will not reveal his face. I'm like, oh my God, it's the wrong guy. It's like, no, they're moving him. And by the way, that might have been the intention from moment one, right? That this is all a way to have him move him from that position. And maybe, Sona, maybe your favorite military trained doctor might make an appearance in the next episode.
I'm kind of giving up hope.
I'm pretty sure he's in this, by the way. According to IMDb, he is in 4 episodes, and we've only seen him in 2. So IMDb does have him listed for 4 episodes. And by the way, some of his teammates are also listed. So I do think we're going to see him next week or maybe in the finale. I have a feeling it's going to happen next week. The fact they've introduced these trained men on the lam behind enemy lines, and they're going to basically need to cross through this region. Those dominoes have all been set up, basically. And of course, 2 more key scenes here towards the end of the episode. One is the fight between Martian and this Chinese agent. What did you think about this sequence?
I'm not one for fight scenes to begin with. So to me, it probably was not as engaging as it would be for other people, but it was interesting to see the different directions the knife took.
Yes.
And stuff like that. Sure, I'll watch.
I felt both ways at the same time, where one, I thought it was a well choreographed fight scene. And then I also felt like it was inconsequential. Martian is not going to die.
Exactly.
He can't murder this agent. Like it would be, even though he's, they're both saying that I could kill you right now. There won't be any consequences. Maybe not for the Chinese agent, but there's no way that Martian could kill this guy in this garage and everyone's going to be cool with it. Definitely not the Chinese government. That's for sure. So I don't think he wants to create an international incident in that moment. You could read that he killed the guy at the end of the scene, but I'm sure he just knocked him out. There would be big stakes if that was the case. There is still the mystery. Of course, we see more and more of it, that he is being questioned. Something catastrophic has happened. He's bruised up. He's in a hospital gown, and he's being questioned by some kind of agent, whether it is British agent, U.S. agent, Chinese agent, or has he followed Samia somewhere and he's somewhere else? I have a feeling he's still in London and something terrible has happened. When you think about all the shady actions he's having and things that he's still kept hidden up until this point, he's caught up in it. in some way. We'll know soon enough. There's only 2 more episodes left. And of course, Samia is leaving the country. He's found out what plane she's on, meets with her privately. And I thought that this was a very tender scene for a relationship that doesn't work for me in general, that this was really a sad scene, this kind of final moments together. And I really do feel this might be their final moments together.
Yeah, I agree.
He even says that you can still change your mind. I can get you out of here right now. And she says, I can't leave my family behind.
Right.
I can't risk their lives. I don't want to betray my country. It's all futile. And once again, great face acting from Fassbender taking this all in.
Yes.
And then just a beautiful scene where they touch foreheads and then, it turns into a kiss. But all of that is really sad. She's leaving with, who is she leaving with? Is that Osman she's leaving with?
I thought so, but I'm not 100% certain.
I'm looking at it now. Yes, it is Osman. If he just turned around at that moment, he'd be like, what? He's here. What's going on here? Unless that is they're taking artistic license and that, he can't actually see out. It would be even funnier, by the way, if Osman turns his head and you see Fassbender dive to the floor quickly. He's just standing there. Yeah, and that's where the episode ends. I know you don't love to speculate, but do you think that this storyline, the romance between him and her, will be wrapped up in this first season of the show?
I think so. That's the sense I have. What do you think?
I do too. I think, and once again, have not seen.
And I hope so. Let me add,
yes.
I hope so. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, what I wouldn't mind potentially is, let's say she survives in some way, and this show does run for years, and I would find it very interesting if at some point in the future, because of the negotiations, because of what's happening between the Chinese and the Sudanese, that she's in some other role at some point and they intersect again. That I would find interesting, almost like your old life coming back to haunt you in a way in the future. That I would enjoy. What I do not want to see at all, that him trying to rescue her or something becomes the driving force for season 2. I don't want to see that.
Right.
I very much want to, and I think this is the way the French show was designed. I very much would like to see a new mission with these same characters dealing with new situations and building on the mistrust they might have for each other based on the things that happened this season. Really like traditional TV making, right? I would love to see that with this cast of characters. I think Naomi's a fascinating character. I think Danny's a fascinating character. I think Martian's a fascinating character. Even the secondary characters, I love Henry and I love the actor Jeffrey Wright in general. I would love to see Bosco more in the show. I like all these characters and find out more about them. Once again, what I come to TV for, right, is not for a isolated story, but for the characters and how they respond to different situations, how their alliances change over time. That's what you're kind of watching a long form story for. And I like all of that. And not only because the romance isn't really working for me that much. I don't want the show to spin its wheels to see if Martian and Samia end up back together. That's not really that interesting to me, to be honest.
Agree completely.
I'm 100% on board for season 2, by the way, just because I like all these characters. I want to know more. I would love to see Naomi in the field or something, trying to put some of these supposedly her beliefs to the test and how she fares, theory versus practice in a way. Her presuppositions about being an agent. All of this would be really interesting to me over time. So I'm very vested. Definitely want to see Poppy and his relationship, just seeing these actors together in general.
It's nice. So, I agree.
So yeah, all of that I'm looking forward to. But I do think that this romance is probably not going to be central, despite how blind love might be. Do they change the theme song?
Say the same thing. We can only hope they will change the theme song in connection with that.
I do hope that they do change the theme song, especially if the romance is not central to the show anymore. And this has happened, by the way. There is precedent where a show does change its theme song over time. Maybe they have a seasonal theme song. So we have just 2 more episodes to go, and we'll be discussing Severance this week too. Yet another thing to consider.
Yep.
Do you plan to watch any of Severance before then?
I feel like on some level you're pleading with me.
I think you might want to.
Because this isn't the first time we've discussed this. And I feel like it's almost like a scolding parent. I'm like, help me to help you. Just watch the dang episodes. So I will see what I can do. promises.
What I would pitch to you, if you have the time for a binge, if you want to watch it with your husband, for example, this was a very different experience of the show. In a binge, it was so much fun. Every episode ends on a cliffhanger. You just click through to the next one. You forget about all these like really awesome cliffhangers that end every episode practically. Or literally every episode. Yeah. And like even the things that I know you didn't like the goats.
The goats.
When you
yes.
go back, I mean, it's like literally the goats are 1 minute of 8 hours of TV watching.
Understood. Yes.
So it, like in the context of a binge, you kind of forgive it those things way more because I'm sure like if you watch The Perfect Couple or something, which we watched obviously here, going week to week on that show would have been absolutely excruciating. But as a binge, easy enough. All the rough parts kind of smooth out.
But now I know the goats are coming back, so that's something.
Yes, but they might just be another minute. They're just throwing them in there because there's so much speculation about the goats.
Let's hope.
All right. Well, we will know soon enough. I think I mentioned this to you already, but the entire season 2 has been presented. I've reached out to Apple TV Plus, by the way, in the past and requested, and I have not ever heard back. So I would love to be able to get those screeners ahead of time. But they didn't just show them 2 or 3 episodes. They showed them the entire season. On Rotten Tomatoes, the reaction is 100% positive.
Amazing.
And most important, the critics have said that they're just like Lost, for example, as they answer questions, more questions get raised. So the mystery deepens. But unlike, let's say, Yellow Jackets, for example, what's actually going on in the show and what Lumen's overall intentions are with this Severance is made clear by the end of season 2. So we're going to get big answers, but then of course, additional mysteries, I'm sure, along the way. And I do like to hear that, right? Because, my frustration with Yellow Jackets, for example, was that they spun their wheels a lot, introduced new characters, had new plot threads, and did not answer any of the central mysteries that were raised by the first season of the show, which I found very frustrating. We'll know soon enough.
We sure will.
All right. And do try to watch some of that show. At least the last couple episodes, I'd say. And all the previously ons. If nothing else, watch all the previously on sequences at the beginning of each episode. All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.